Patricia never imagined that her bachelorette party would end with her heart ablaze for a stranger. She was the epitome of what society expected: wealthy, elegant, fiancée to one of the country's most influential businessmen, and heiress to a traditional family that valued appearances above all else. Her wedding to Eduardo was already set, and the dress, white, tight, immaculate, hung on a silk hanger as if fate were already sealed. But there was something inside her chest she couldn't silence: a restlessness, an absence of real passion, an emptiness that neither the luxurious invitations, nor the inherited jewelry, nor the smiling photographs could fill. And that's why, when her friends dragged her to that exclusive nightclub for high society women, Patricia decided, for the first time in a long while, not to decline the invitation. Little did she know that night, everything would change. The environment was dark, elegant, perfumed with scents too sweet to be natural. The stage, illuminated by red and purple lights, was the center of everything. And it was when the music intensified and the women around her began to scream that Patricia saw, for the first time, William. He entered dancing as if his body were made of fire and rhythm. Dark-skinned, strong, with a perfectly sculpted abdomen, and a presence that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. He was shirtless, wearing only black pants that molded to his strong legs. But it wasn't just his body that drew attention. It was his gaze. A steady, intense, hypnotic gaze. When his eyes met hers, Patricia felt something inexplicable, as if the whole world had gone silent for a second, as if she were being seen, truly seen, for the very first time. He danced for all, but looked only at her. Every movement was like a subtle provocation, a promise of something words could not explain. Her friends screamed, clapped, laughed between sips of expensive champagne, but Patricia couldn't take her eyes off him. And then, as if the universe had conspired in favor of madness, William stepped down from the stage and stopped right in front of her. He extended his hand. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, enough to seal a destiny, but she accepted, and was pulled to the center of the stage. The lights turned to them, the music changed, and her body, initially rigid, began to yield to his rhythm. William guided her with devastating confidence. His hips approached hers with precision. His arms enveloped her without touching. Their mouths came close, but didn't meet. It was like a dance between desire and restraint, between reason and impulse. Patricia was in a trance. Every second of that dance was an internal battle. She, raised to be discreet, to control her impulses, to marry a man who embodied everything her family valued, was now on the stage of a nightclub, dancing with a shirtless stranger, and feeling happy, alive, desired, free. It was a kind of freedom she had never experienced. And at that moment she realized there was something about that man that broke down all her defenses. Something that screamed from within, telling her that this was the first time she felt something real. When the music ended, William let her go slowly, his gaze still locked on hers. The lights went out. Applause echoed all around, but Patricia could barely hear it. She was stunned, as if she had plunged into a parallel world. She returned to the table with trembling legs, a racing heart, and a name pounding in her mind. William. She sat down and tried to play it cool, smiled mechanically, took a sip of champagne, pretended everything was normal. But inside, everything had changed. She looked at the stage once more. He was still there. And even among so many women around, William looked at her as if she were the only one, as if he knew, as if he felt the same. That night, Patricia went home with her dress smelling of perfume, her body marked by hands that hadn't truly touched her, and her mind spinning in circles. Eduardo called to ask if she had fun. She said yes, but it was a lie, because fun was not enough. That had been an explosion, an internal earthquake, an epiphany, and the worst, or the best, was that she knew it wouldn't end there. She knew that that dance had not just been a farewell game. William had entered her life, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. The sun entered through the large windows of Patricia's apartment, like an unwelcome intruder, slipping through the beige linen curtains and pouring light over a restless body. She woke up early, even though her body still begged for a few more hours of sleep. But it wasn't her body that kept her awake. It was her mind, her heart, the memories of that night. The music still vibrated inside her. The dance, the heat of William's touch, even without hands, the scent of the place, the sensation of his body so close. and yet so forbidden. And above all, the gaze. That gaze. Patricia brought her hands to her face, closed her eyes, and sighed like someone trying to lock the past inside a box. But that past was still happening, and there was no more pretending that nothing had happened. While having coffee alone, sitting on a balcony overlooking the city, Patricia tried to rationalize what she felt. She kept telling herself it was just one night, a farewell fantasy, a lapse before the definitive commitment to Eduardo. After all, she had everything any woman could wish for: a successful fiancé, $1 million wedding on the way, a life surrounded by luxury, travels, parties, and an impeccable reputation. But there was one uncomfortable detail. She didn't want that. Or at least, she didn't want it anymore. The truth that began to emerge was cruel in its simplicity. Patricia was in love with someone she had met dancing, with someone whose last name she didn't even know, with someone who probably had absolutely nothing to offer but intensity and truth. But that was exactly what she wanted. On the other side of the city, William was restless. He had spent the night tossing and turning, replaying the dance dozens of times in his mind. It wasn't unusual for him to make rich women swoon during his shows. But there was something different about Patricia. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't laughing hysterically. She seemed disconnected from everything around her, as if she had been pulled into another dimension. And he felt the same. He felt he had touched her with something beyond his body, with his soul. And that scared him. He had fallen in love before, and it always ended the same way: hurt, dismissed, discarded. He knew he was seen as entertainment, as a one-night fantasy. But Patricia didn't seem to see only what everyone else saw. She looked at him as a man, as someone, and that shook him deeply. While William did his morning stretches at the small studio where he practiced, his phone vibrated. It was a simple notification, a like from Patricia on the bar's profile. He smiled. It wasn't direct contact, but it was a sign. She remembered him, she was thinking about him, and that was enough to ignite a spark of hope. Later that day, he gathered the courage and sent her a private message. Simple, direct, no embellishments. If you felt the same as I did, meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. in front of the abandoned theater on Augusta Street. I'll be there, and I'll dance just for you. Patricia read the message with trembling hands. This was madness, dangerous, reckless. But when your body trembles at simple words, it means your heart has already made the choice before your mind. She stared at the phone for hours, trying not to respond. But that night, while Eduardo spoke on the phone with his legal advisor about contracts and investments, she replied with just, "I'll be there." The next morning, the words they had exchanged couldn't leave either of their minds. William spent the day rehearsing a choreography just for her. Every step crafted with passion, care, desire. He couldn't explain why, but he wanted to impress her. He wanted her to see him beyond the stage, beyond the body. He wanted to show her that there was a whole man there, with a history, with a soul. And Patricia, she was torn between fear and impulse. She avoided her mother, avoided her friends, even avoided the mirror. She wore a simple dress and a dark coat, trying to disappear in the streets of a city where she had always been seen as a symbol of elegance. That night would be the beginning of the end, or the end of what she knew as life. At exactly 8 p.m., she was there. The theater had been closed for years, but still held within its walls the weight of art and memories. William was waiting, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, with one earbud in and a discreet smile. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, motionless. He extended his hand. She took it, and then he danced. No audience, no applause, only for her. The music came from a small portable speaker, but it was as if the entire universe had gone silent for that moment. Patricia cried quietly. William danced, as if each movement said, "Don't let me go." And when he finished, he approached slowly, breathless, still sweating, still panting, but with his eyes fixed on hers. "Are you going to marry him?" he asked. She hesitated, took a deep breath, looked down, then, with a trembling voice, said, "I don't know anymore." That was the moment when everything truly began. Because while the world expected obedience, status, and tradition from her, Patricia was beginning to discover that maybe all she really needed was to dance with William one more time, even if the whole world was watching. That night became a precious secret kept within the beats of Patricia's heart. The way William danced under the stars, in front of the old theater, still pulsed on her skin, as if every one of his gestures had left an invisible mark on her body. In the silence of the early morning, Lying next to Eduardo, who slept unsuspectingly, Patricia stared at the ceiling like someone watching their own conscience fragment. She hadn't touched William. They hadn't kissed. They hadn't gone beyond an intense dance and scattered words in the air. Yet, even so, guilt began to settle like a shadow born from desire. Because deep down, she knew. Betrayal begins when the heart chooses another name. The next day, William didn't send a message, and neither did she have the courage to seek him out. It was as if both understood that the intensity of that night needed silence to settle. But the silence, for Patricia, turned into a prison. In the days that followed, she found herself going through the motions of the wedding preparations with Eduardo as if she were on autopilot. She tasted cakes, chose flowers, visited the cathedral, gave interviews to fashion magazines, smiled for photos. But everything felt distant, as if another woman was living her life for her. And every time Eduardo touched her, she felt William's presence stronger than ever, as if her body no longer belonged to the life she led. That Friday, Patricia made a decision that would change everything. She asked the driver to drop her off on Paulista Avenue, saying she was visiting a friend. But she got out a block earlier and walked to the bar where William danced. She didn't call, didn't set a time. She just went. Her heart was beating so loudly she could hear it. The environment no longer scared her. The red lights, the women's screams, the loud music, none of that mattered. She wanted to see him. She needed to. When she walked in, he was on stage, in the middle of the dance, shirtless, sweating, breathless. And again, like the first time, his eyes found hers. William didn't smile. He just looked at her, a steady look, as if he knew that this encounter was no accident. When the performance ended, he left the stage without speaking to anyone and walked straight to her. He didn't say a word. He just guided her backstage, down a dark corridor, to a small room with mirrors, benches, and the smell of sweat mixed with cheap perfume. And there, in the screaming silence, they stood face to face. Patricia wanted to speak, to explain, to say she was confused, lost, afraid. But there was no time. William cupped her face with both hands and kissed her. It was a kiss without permission, but also without resistance. It was the explosion of everything that had been trapped since that first dance. A kiss loaded with urgency, with contained desire, with anguish and relief. Their bodies fit together with a frightening naturalness, as if they had known each other in other lives. Patricia felt his hands holding her waist firmly, while his mouth explored hers with both delicacy and hunger, and she responded with the same fervor. There was no turning back, no more doubt. She was too involved to pretend. When the kiss ended, they remained there, looking at each other, breathless, pressed together, as if the entire world was outside and in that room. Only the two of them existed. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you are," he replied, his eyes locked on hers. Patricia left the bar in silence, without looking back. She got into the car and asked the driver not to ask any questions. On the way back, she looked out the window, trying to understand what she had done, what she was doing. But the guilt was mixed with something else, a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, for the first time, she had done something for herself, something not planned by others, something that didn't fit into the schedule of a perfect bride, and that scared her. But also, it made her stronger. In the following days, Patricia tried to return to a normal life, but the word normal no longer made sense. William's kiss came back like an unexpected lightning bolt every time she closed her eyes. Eduardo noticed the distance, the distractions, the averted gaze. He asked if everything was okay, and Patricia replied, "Of course," as if she could fool someone, as if she could fool herself. But her body didn't lie. Her heart beat for someone else. And William? He had changed too. After that kiss, he started dancing with less enthusiasm for the others. Began to avoid certain looks, to distance himself from easy invitations. Something inside him told him that this woman would come back, that this story hadn't been a mistake, but a beginning, and he was willing to wait, even if that meant dancing on the outside while bleeding on the inside. That's how it all began, with a kiss, a mistake that felt like the right thing, a stumble that felt like flight. Patricia was still, technically, a bride about to marry, but deep down, she already belonged to another world, a world where love didn't follow rules, where desire spoke louder, and where, amid the chaos, a shirtless dancer had touched her soul as no one ever dared to. The days that followed felt like walking on shards of glass. Patricia lived in a constant state of pretense, faking smiles at dinners, repeating rehearsed lines at wedding meetings, enduring Eduardo's cold affection with her soul shriveled and her eyes fixed on another memory. William's kiss hadn't been just a kiss. It was a rupture, a point of no return. And the more she tried to cover it up with expensive dresses, family commitments, and the collective expectation of a flawless wedding, the louder the truth inside her screamed, a truth that could no longer be silenced. William, for his part, was also conflicted. It was the first time in years he had truly fallen in love. But love came with the bitter taste of the forbidden. He knew who she was. He knew that with that kiss, he had not only challenged a wedding engagement, but an empire of status and pride. And still, he couldn't stay away. The desire to see her again, to touch her, to pull her out of the world where she suffocated, was stronger than fear. And that's how everything spilled over. It was a Saturday night. The bar where William danced was packed. The music pounded loud. Women screamed excitedly, and the stage vibrated with moving lights. Patricia, driven by a mixture of longing and impulse, decided to go back. She knew she was risking everything, but her body couldn't wait any longer. She dressed discreetly, with a long coat and dark sunglasses, and went alone. When she arrived, William was finishing a performance. Upon seeing her in the audience, he froze for a second, but continued. And at the end of the music, without thinking of the consequences, he stepped off the stage, crossed the crowd, and pulled her by the hand. They didn't say a word. They went straight to the backstage. There, among mirrors and curtains, came the second kiss, and the third, and the fourth. Their hands recognized each other, their bodies fit together. There was no sex, but there was surrender. Intense, silent, overwhelming. They were there, in each other, as if the outside world had ceased to exist, but the world hadn't disappeared, and someone saw. Someone took a photo. The next day, the image of Patricia and William kissing backstage at the bar was in every gossip group of the elite. The headline was cruel. Bride of the Year caught kissing nightclub stripper. The reactions were immediate. Her family went into shock. Her parents shut off their phones, advisors were mobilized, and Eduardo's company issued a public statement saying that Miss Denise was emotionally unstable and that the wedding was temporarily suspended. But none of that compared to the moment when Eduardo showed up at Patricia's apartment, furious, disfigured by wounded pride. He entered without asking permission, punched doors, knocked over vases, screamed. He accused, humiliated, demanded explanations. Patricia, head held high, tried to stay calm, tried to say she owned herself, that she no longer loved Eduardo, that the marriage was never about love, but about convenience. But he didn't want to listen. He called William an opportunist, a freeloader, trash, said she was throwing everything away for a pretty body, and that was the moment Patricia lost control. He may not have your money, Eduardo, but he has something you never had, respect for me, and that's worth more than any ring. The words hit like stones. Eduardo fell silent for a second, then spat out a threat and left, slamming the door. Patricia stayed there, in silence, feeling her chest and eyes burn. For the first time in her entire life, she had spoken the truth out loud, and she was ready to face all the consequences. The next day, the Denise family home was in collapse. Patricia's parents wanted to have her committed to a psychiatric clinic under the pretext of emotional instability. Her friends disappeared. The wedding invitations were canceled. The wedding dress returned. And Patricia packed a small suitcase, walked down the mansion stairs without saying a word, called a cab, and went to live with William. In that instant, she stopped being a showroom woman to become a real woman. The choice was made. And even with everything in ruins around her, there was a new light in her eyes. The light of someone who, for the first time, chose herself and love above all. But he didn't want to listen. Eduardo's eyes were red, not from pain, but from rage. It wasn't his heart he was protecting. It was his ego. A man like him couldn't accept being left, especially not by someone he deemed inferior. He shouted that William was an opportunist, a drifter who only wanted money and fame. He accused Patricia of shaming the family, of staining the name she had carried since birth. He tried to make her feel small, dirty, dishonored, but he failed, because Patricia, though afraid, was different now. Something inside her had awakened, a silent but unbreakable strength. And in that moment, for the first time, she spoke firmly, clearly, unshakably. "You never loved me. You loved what I represented. The perfect daughter, the trophy wife, a piece on your chessboard. But I'm a woman, and I choose to leave this game." Eduardo froze for a moment, and then stormed out, slamming the door, swearing revenge, promising he'd make her life a living hell. Patricia cried, not from regret, but from liberation. She knew the consequences would come. She knew the days ahead would be hard. But deep in her heart, she also knew that something greater awaited her. That another destiny, written with the trembling hands of courage, was beginning right there. And as expected, the attacks came. Society columns called her unbalanced. Her family cut off her credit cards, threatened to have her committed, and the invitations to high society events vanished overnight. Meanwhile, William was hounded by reporters, had old photos dug up, and was labeled a cheap seducer, a homewrecker. He lost contracts, was removed from an important show, and had his name dragged across every corner of the internet. But even so, he didn't leave her. Not for a second. He stayed with her, holding her hand when doors closed, embracing her when the cold of rejection tried to paralyze her. They hid in small cafes, walked hand in hand through empty streets at night, whispered promises in rented rooms with worn-out mattresses, and it was in those anonymous moments, far from the spotlight, that Patricia discovered love, the real kind, the one that doesn't demand molds, that doesn't have a contract, that is born from improvisation. William, in turn, saw in that woman a phoenix, someone who had everything, lost everything, and yet remained beautiful, strong, determined. He loved her with a serene intensity, without fear, without haste, like someone who had found what he'd been waiting for his whole life. But their story was far from over. Eduardo hadn't given up, and Patricia's parents were determined to save her from herself. The pressure mounted. The headlines didn't stop, and their love, though strong, was beginning to be tested by the winds of a world that does not accept the improbable. And yet, there was a light in Patricia's eyes that refused to go out. Something said that, even surrounded by the storm, she and William were ready to face whatever came their way. Because when two souls recognize each other, neither scandal, nor prejudice, nor the fury of the powerful is capable of tearing them apart. They were together, but they were alone. Alone against an entire world shaped by appearance, status, and conventions that crushed any love daring to bloom outside the rules. Patricia and William, now living in a small apartment in the middle of the city, were learning the hard way what it meant to walk against the current. She, used to soft beds and Egyptian cotton sheets, now slept on a simple mattress, but embraced by a man who made her heart beat with truth. He, who had always lived on the margins, asked himself every day how someone like her would choose to live by his side. But her gaze answered everything. She hadn't chosen a harder life. She had chosen to love for real. Prejudice, however, was daily. People pointed at them in the streets, whispered at markets, judged them on social media. Patricia was called crazy, unbalanced, a traitor to her own class. William was labeled a gigolo, an opportunist, a threat. No one saw the love, only the scandal. And when job doors started to close for both of them, the weight of reality set in. William was fired from the bar. Customers no longer wanted to see the dancer who ruined an elite marriage. Patricia tried to use her business degree to get something in the market, but her name was burned. No company from high society wanted to be associated with the bride who left a businessman for a stripper. But it was there, among overdue bills, simple meals, and sleepless nights, that their love was put to the test, and it won. Because there was no luxury, but there was partnership. No status, but there was loyalty. Patricia learned to wash clothes by hand, to cook improvising, to ride the subway. William relearned how to dream, to build a plan, to share a life. The nights were hard, but full of tenderness, and the moments of despair were always interrupted by a long hug, an improvised dance in the middle of the living room, by kisses that felt like silent vows that everything would be okay. Even so, the attacks continued. Eduardo filed a lawsuit for defamation and damage to image. The accusation was absurd, claiming that William had seduced Patricia to ruin his career and defame his public figure. But Eduardo's name was still powerful. His lawyers were ruthless, and in no time, William found himself summoned to humiliating hearings where he was treated like an emotional delinquent. Patricia accompanied him silently, hand in hand, facing judges, reporters, and stares with the same firmness she had shown when she left the mansion. She had burned her bridges, there was nowhere to return, and because of that, she moved forward. The tabloid press showed no mercy. They made up stories, dug up old photos of William at parties, created narratives that Patricia was under influence and needed psychiatric intervention. One columnist even wrote that she was just another rich woman in an identity crisis who falls into the trap of sex with the different before returning to the comfort of her class. That was the last straw. Patricia grabbed her phone, recorded a simple and direct video with tearful eyes and a firm voice. She said, "I am not in crisis. I am awake. And if loving someone who didn't come from the same world as mine is wrong, then I choose to keep being wrong. William didn't take anything from me. He gave me everything. Dignity, respect, and a love none of you will ever understand." The video went viral. The criticism intensified, but voices of support also began to emerge. Ordinary people, women who felt represented, people who believed that love was stronger than appearances. William, moved, watched the recording hundreds of times. It was the woman he loved, there, facing the world with steady eyes and an open heart. And he knew she was his strength. But even with the winds of opinion starting to shift, the obstacles were daily. Money was tight, the pressure was high, the pain was real. And every night before falling asleep, Patricia asked herself, "Will it be worth it?" And then, William answered, without her saying a word, with a kiss on her forehead, a caress in her hair, a hug that said, "Yes, it will." Because the world might be against them, but as long as they were together, they were invincible. Their story was far from a fairy tale. And like all love that dares to defy structures, there came a moment when reality bared its teeth with even greater cruelty. Eduardo, wounded in his pride, decided to do what he did best: crush. Patricia was no longer just the woman who had rejected him. She was now a symbol of public humiliation. And William was not just the dancer who took his fiancée. He was a threat to his image. Eduardo didn't just want to separate them. He wanted to destroy them. One by one, each pillar of their new life. The first blow was financial. One of the properties in Patricia's name, which she used as a guarantee for her livelihood, became the target of a legal dispute involving clauses from her family's will. A process once ignored now resurfaced with aggression. Simultaneously, companies linked to Eduardo began pressuring cultural event sponsors to boycott any participation by William. The invitations disappeared, payments were delayed, and his name became associated with a narrative that grew silently in the shadows: that he was unstable, provocative, and emotionally dangerous. Patricia, realizing the noose tightening, tried to use what little was left of her influence to contain the damage. But everything was contaminated. The banks froze her account under the pretext of a legal security review. Her credit coverage was cut. Eduardo's actions were invisible, indirect, but as precise as a scalpel. He was pulling the strings of power like a maestro of reputational destruction. And the worst part, he could smile while doing it. William, as strong as he was, began to feel the weight. He was a man used to battles, but never this kind of war. Silent, dirty, full of masks. He started to question himself. Should he step back? Was he dragging Patricia down with him? Was their love, however true, worth the pain, the exposure, the exhaustion? She noticed, and she didn't let him. Patricia looked at him one night, in the heavy silence, and said with a trembling but firm voice, "If you ask me to go, I will. But if you love me, I'll stay, even if we have to start over from nothing." William cried, silently, and held her like he was holding his very breath. In that embrace, they sealed something greater than a commitment, a resistance. They wouldn't bow, they wouldn't run, and so, they decided to act. Patricia reached out to an old college friend, now a renowned attorney specializing in image rights and freedom of expression. She told her everything, every veiled threat, every suspicious document, every intimidating call. The lawyer, after hearing it all, replied with eyes gleaming, "Let's turn the game around." They began gathering evidence, screenshots, recordings, testimonies. They uncovered a web of manipulations orchestrated by Eduardo to defame William and isolate Patricia. Purchased emails, paid influencers, fake news with leaked data from internal sources. It was a meticulous web, but not flawless. And at last, they had what they needed. They filed a lawsuit for slander, harassment, moral damages, and abuse of power. And when the petition landed on Eduardo's desk, he laughed. He didn't believe she had the courage to face him in court. He thought it was all just a passing flare. But he was wrong, because the woman he had tried to mold was now someone else. And William, who once danced to survive, now fought to protect. News of the lawsuit leaked. The media started reporting on the case again, but with a new tone. Something was changing. People began to pay attention. The love story once treated as scandal now began to look like injustice. Voices began to rise in their favor. Support campaigns, solidarity videos, even a petition demanding that William be allowed to return to the stages that had banned him. It was as if, little by little, the wind was beginning to shift. But they knew that hard days still lay ahead. That Eduardo, wounded, would not retreat easily. That the attacks might intensify. Still, they were no longer alone. Now there were allies. Voices. Lights turned on in the darkness. And above all, there were the two of them. Together. Stronger than ever. Because love that survives the war is already born victorious. The lawsuit against Eduardo was like throwing a stone into a once-still lake. The first reactions were discreet, muffled by those who still feared going against a powerful man. But as the days passed, the ripples spread, and each new detail revealed about the persecution Patricia and William suffered began to draw the attention of people who saw in their story something greater than a romantic scandal. They saw resistance, truth, justice. Patricia's lawyer conducted the case with surgical intelligence. She gathered documents, exposed the hidden links between Eduardo and tabloid columnists, presented bank records of suspicious payments, and emails with veiled orders to sabotage William's image. The narrative that once painted them as villains began to reverse. Now, Eduardo seemed like a dark, vengeful, and cruel man. The public, once so quick to judge, began to listen, to think, to sympathize. Meanwhile, William and Patricia were rebuilding, not their reputation, but their souls. They created a small dance studio in a modest neighborhood with the savings they managed to salvage. The place was simple. Mirrors glued to the walls, rustic wooden floors, speakers donated by a friend. But there, in that almost secret space, something magical began to grow. Young people who had never been able to afford a dance class started to frequent the place. Shy, invisible, wounded people. And William danced for them with the same fervor he had danced for Patricia that first night. He said, "To dance is to survive with beauty." And they understood. When the press discovered the project, the tone changed. A feature aired on a Sunday night showed images of the small school, the free classes, the genuine smiles. And at the end of the report, a snippet of an interview with Patricia, where she said, "They tried to silence us with fear, but they forget that when someone decides to love truly, there is no silence that can resist." That was enough to reignite the public flame. The hashtag, #SureLoveWithoutShame, went viral. Influencers who had previously stayed quiet now defended them. Artists invited them for collaborations. A famous choreographer offered William the chance to perform in a contemporary show that would blend dance and storytelling. It would be his debut on an official stage. A stage of respect, and he accepted. The premiere took place at an old restored theater in the city center. The show was called Rupture, and it narrated, through intense movements, the story of a marginalized man and a woman imprisoned by expectations, who set themselves free together through art. William didn't just dance. He lived on that stage. His soul, his traumas, his love, his rage, everything was there, exposed, like an open letter to the world. At the end, Patricia came up on stage with him. They didn't say anything. They just embraced, and the entire theater stood in ovation. From the balcony, Patricia's mother watched in silence. She was there alone, after months without seeing her daughter, and for the first time, she cried, not out of shame, but of regret. That daughter on stage wasn't a disappointment. She was a woman, alive, whole, true. The next day, William's name filled headlines with words like rebirth, resilience, and talent. The doors reopened. The invitations returned. But now, with a different tone. He was no longer the dancer from the scandal. He was the artist of truth. And as for Eduardo, he watched his image crumble, little by little. The lawsuit was moving forward with strength. He lost contracts, was removed from boards, and came to be seen as an example of abuse of power. His silence was now the scream of someone who finally understands that he lost everything, and that love, the one he never understood, had won. After months of hiding, being judged, isolated, and crushed by rumors, the day finally came when William and Patricia could exist in the sunlight, not as a scandal, but as a symbol. No longer as a mistake to be silenced, but as a story to be celebrated. The invitation came from the contemporary dance company where William had made such an impactful debut. They wanted him to create a new choreography, this time signed with his name. But there was one detail. They wanted Patricia on stage too. She, who had never danced professionally, hesitated. But William, with a serene gaze and open arms, said, "You've been dancing with me since the very first look." And so was born the performance Bare Truth, a show that traversed pain, prejudice, resistance, and love. No masks, no rehearsed scripts, just two souls meeting in every step, every breath, every silence. The theater was packed on opening night. Artists, journalists, friends, the curious. Patricia's mother sat in the front row, hands clasped in her lap and heart racing. The lawyer who had defended them was also there, eyes filled with tears. And among the audience, ordinary people. People who didn't just want to watch a dance, but to witness the victory of something that had already touched their own paths. Interracial couples, unlikely loves, women who had left unhappy marriages, rejected young artists, all there, breathing together. The curtain rose, and when William and Patricia appeared on stage, side by side, the audience fell silent. There were no elaborate costumes. She wore a light, almost transparent dress, barefoot. He, simple pants, chest bare as he had always danced. The music began, a soft melody cut by deep beats, like hearts pulsing in the dark, and then they danced. Not as professional dancers, but as two living stories. The choreography was a silent scream. It showed the weight of stares, the shove of rejection, the knees that fall. But it also showed the hands that lift, the bodies that intertwine, the steps that synchronize even amidst chaos. It was intimate, almost uncomfortable in its truth. At one moment, she moved away from him and collapsed on the floor, as if giving up. And he, with his back turned, paused, came back, knelt, lifted her, and together, they began again. At the end, they stood face to face, and without it being in the script, William gently touched her face and kissed her. A long, calm kiss, full of layers. The curtain fell while they were still like that, embraced, motionless, victorious. The audience erupted. A standing ovation, cries of "Bravo," tears, laughter. It was more than emotion. It was catharsis. It was the world saying, "Now you can love without apologizing." The next day, newspapers of every kind published unexpected headlines. The love story that became art, from scandal to inspiration. When dancing is resistance. And William's name, once synonymous with ridicule, now graced editorials as an example of resilience. Patricia was invited for interviews on shows that once ignored her, and in one of these conversations, when asked if she regretted it all, she replied with a serene smile, "I only regret the time I spent trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. But loving William? Never. That's what saved me." That week, the two were honored by a cultural organization that celebrated stories of resistance and freedom. They walked on stage together, and this time, hand in hand, without rehearsals, without scripts, they looked at an audience applauding them not for scandal, but for courage. Because now, their love no longer needed to hide. Now, they danced in full view of everyone. And every step, every touch, every look said the same thing. We won. They had already faced the worst. The judgment, the abandonment, the prejudice. And against all odds, they were still together. William and Patricia had discovered that true love doesn't need palaces, jewels, or promises made at marble altars. They had chosen each other 1,000 times, every day, even when the world said no. That's why, when they talked about marriage, it wasn't with fanfare. It was with calm, with eyes locked, with hands intertwined and hearts silently saying, "The time has come." Patricia refused the tight, $1,000,000 white wedding dress that had once been ordered for a cold, soulless ceremony. Instead, she wore a light, raw linen dress, with lace hand-embroidered by students from the social dance school they had created together. The dress didn't shine, but it floated. It carried stories, and it smelled of freedom. William, for his part, appeared in an open white shirt, light trousers, and barefoot, his beard unshaven, his hair loose in the wind. He looked like a living poem, the man she had chosen. Who had chosen her? No veils, no masks. The place for the ceremony was simple. A field of flowers on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by tall trees and the distant sound of birds. There was no altar, no red carpet, just a clearing, 2 chairs, a guitar, and a few dozen people who truly understood what that moment meant. Those who mattered were there, the young dancers from the school, the friends who hadn't turned their backs, the lawyer who had defended them like a lioness, and, in a gesture Patricia would never forget, her mother, in a blue dress, with teary eyes and a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. She approached her daughter before the ceremony began. She didn't say anything at first, just hugged her, tight, long, like someone asking for forgiveness without needing words. Then, she whispered, "You won, and now I understand. You just wanted to be happy." When Patricia walked to William, there was no loud music, no flashes, no rehearsed steps, just steady steps, true ones. And the light in his eyes as he saw her approach was brighter than any sun. When they stood face to face, no one needed to lead the ceremony. It was the lawyer, now their maid of honor, who said, "Today you're not sealing a contract. You're sealing a story written with tears, with dance, with courage, and with love. Say only what you feel." William held her hands and with a choked voice said, "I didn't know what love was until you looked at me. I was just body, sweat, and silence. You gave me a voice. You gave me a name. You gave me a home. And now, this is where I want to dance forever." Patricia cried, but she smiled and replied, "You pulled me out of a place where I was a prisoner of a future that was never mine. You showed me that love is not a scream. It's shelter, it's touch, it's surrender. And I surrender, completely, no veils, no doubts." The kiss came as a response, and it was there, under the open sky, with the smell of earth and freedom, that the wedding happened. No judge, no documents, but with a force that no paper could ever translate. After the ceremony, they all sat together at improvised tables with colorful cloths, simple dishes, and food made by the students from the school. There was dancing, yes, but not with choreography, with spontaneity. Everyone danced, as if there, in that field, the world was suspended, and everyone was free. That night, as they lay side by side on a simple bed with sheets worn by time, William stroked Patricia's hair and said, "Now, yes, we're married the right way." She smiled and replied, "Our way, the only one that makes sense." Years passed, and that couple who once made magazine covers as scandal and deviation from the norm was now remembered by another word: inspiration. William and Patricia never sought fame nor recognition. They sought only peace. But the world, seeing them persist, loving each other with the same intensity as in the early days, was slowly transformed. What was once taboo became an example. What was once defiance became poetry. And their story, once whispered with scorn, was now told out loud, with pride, with admiration, with hope. The small dance school they created together blossomed. It gained new spaces, students, teachers. It became a refuge for those who needed to express themselves, to rediscover themselves, to rebuild. Patricia began teaching career management to young artists. William, besides choreographing award-winning performances, danced with beginners, looking into each one's eyes and saying, "You are more than they told you you were." They knew what it was like to be disbelieved, and so they decided every day to open paths for those who came after. The house they lived in was simple, full of plants, books, music, and art scattered on the walls. Money was never the focus, success even less, but love that never ceased to be the center of everything. They danced in the kitchen while the rice boiled. They sang off-key in the car while crossing the city. They shared silence at the end of the afternoon like those who share an ancient secret. And even on difficult nights, because yes, they still existed, there was always a gesture that said, "We're together, no matter what." Patricia rebuilt her relationship with her mother, now lighter, more human. Eduardo, after losing lawsuits and seeing his public image corroded, disappeared from the news. Occasionally, he still tried to make a comeback, but the world was no longer the same. There was no longer room for intolerance disguised as etiquette. And William? William had become more than a dancer. He was now a symbol, a voice, a political body in motion. His name was cited in schools, his videos studied in art and resistance workshops. But he never let himself be carried away by fame. For him, the greatest achievement would always be coming home and seeing Patricia in pajamas, barefoot, with a smile that said, it was worth it. They didn't have children, at least not by blood, but all the young people who passed through the school, who cried telling their stories, who smiled when discovering they could exist in their own way, became part of the great family they built with love, brick by brick. On a wedding anniversary, William took Patricia back to the abandoned theater where it all began. It was closed, covered in dust and dry leaves. But when they entered, the memory pulsed. The smell, the sounds, the energy. He placed a small speaker on the floor, just like that first night, and began to dance. Slowly, looking only at her, Patricia took off her shoes and danced too. And there, on the stage that was the first setting of their story, they kissed as those who seal an eternity. "Do you still dance with me?" he whispered. "Until the end," she replied. And so they continued, loving without fear, dancing without rehearsal, living without molds, showing the world that true love does not bow to prejudice, is not intimidated by status, does not silence under pressure. True love, when it finds shelter, blooms. And even if the world tries to erase it, those who truly love dance until the end.